With this year being a Shemittah year, and clearly we know it has certain effects on the type of agricultural produce, even wine, but what does it even mean? How does it affect us? Well, that's something we're going to explore on this 111th episode of The Jewish Drinking Show, bringing L'chaim to life.
I'm very excited to welcome first-time guest of the show, Rabbi Ezra Friedman. Rabbi Friedman, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. So for those less familiar with Rabbi Friedman, he is the Deputy Rabbinic Administrator of OU Kosher in Israel, as well as the director of the OU Israel Gustave and Carol Jacob Center for Kashrut Education, as well as the rabbi of Kehilat, Musar, Avicha, and Maale Adumim. He also has a halacha hotline with over 6,000 questions a year. He is married to Ronit and has 4 lovely children. So, Rabbi Friedman, once again, welcome to the show.
Pleasure.
Awesome. So, what we're discussing today is about Shemittah, which I've actually been several people have requested I talk about because for those less familiar with Shemittah, it is something that really only occurs in Israel every 7 years. So, especially it's probably a massive difference. People living in Israel, they have it for a year. It's very present. But for diasporians, for those of us living outside of the land of Israel, we don't really have a lot of interaction with it because, and Rabbi Friedman, you could probably speak more to this. A lot of it has to do on a more day-to-day basis, whether it's fruits, it's vegetables, but a lot of that stuff doesn't get out, certainly not to America, right?
So, Rabbi, it's funny. It's funny you mentioned. There's no question that it affects the daily lives of any Israeli consumer, whether it be restaurants, pizza shops, catering services, wedding halls, and of course, your supermarket or your local kitchen, whether it be fruits, vegetables, leafy stuff, anything. I mean, even shampoos came into question this year of using certain extracts from rosemary and other products.
Wow.
In fact, it actually does affect the American community, the American religious Jewish community, more than one might think, because there are certain Jewish sects that will not consume certain types of products on Shemittah, and there's a large export. There's a famous carrot company exported large amounts of their carrots to the United States. The New York, New Jersey area is full of them, and it became a big issue. Safra, citrus fruits and lemons, and it definitely doesn't affect as much as it affects the Israelis here, but there's a little bit of a feeling of Shemittah by the American community as well.
Yeah, so I do want to get to what we will mainly talk about, which is wine, because whereas most of American religious Jews are not going to be consuming these fruits and vegetables and other agricultural products, but a very significant agricultural product is wine, and that's something that can be around for literally years to come. So that is something that is certainly a significant topic for us to discuss. But before we get into the granular pieces, Rabbi Friedman, can you, for those listeners and viewers less familiar with Shemittah, can you share a little bit broadly about Shemittah?
So I'll try to make it Shemittah for dummies, as we say.
Yeah.
Rabbi Jews. So every 7 years, just as if there's every 7 days, there is a day of rest of the Jewish people, which prohibits us from doing any activity that includes creation or working or production. We stop cooking and sewing and watering and so on and so forth, and sowing and growing and whatever it might be. So this 7th year, the Sabbath of the 7th year is applied to the land of Israel. That means every 7th year, for the entire year, the land may not be worked, meaning that includes planting, that includes different types of harvesting in different fashions. The fruits and vegetables that are grown during the Shemitah year are considered that there's no, the ownership is basically forfeited by the owners, and it's basically a free-for-all. Basically, anybody can come and take their vegetables and food and grapes and olives, and it belongs to them. And the land becomes basically abandoned, and people come and enjoy it. The Torah teaches us, of course, that just like ones who keep Shabbat merit the blessing of that, the rest of their week and the substance they have will only be bountiful more because of they keep Shabbat. The Torah teaches us that we keep Shemitah, we'll have more and more, we'll have the fruit we need both in the 6th year and the 8th year, and that happens every 7-year cycle. Some actually people say, interesting Rabbi Drew, that it's actually good for the land. There's good for the land to have a break, to kind of simmer, and that the fruit that will come out in the next years will be more bountiful, fruitful, sweet, and delicious. That's on a very basic level. You want to move. There's also the industrial part and how the consumer deals with Shemitah. But
sure, actually, you know what? That's a great. So there's a lot of biblical stuff, a lot of general stuff, and we'll definitely be getting to the wine specific stuff, which I definitely want to hit. But I am curious on, at least in a contemporary fashion, how do both on the production side, but on the consumer side, how do people deal with it?
So that's perfect. I'm going to split this very briefly into 4 different parts about how the Shemitah affects the consumer.
Wonderful.
And that will, Rabbi Jew, that will definitely affect the wine as well. So in Israel today, there are 4 ways to deal with Shemitah, and they affect the consumer in every aspect. One, the most main common factor for the Israeli consumer is something called heter mechira. Heter mechira is basically heter means the unique halachic allowance, permissibility of selling. So this goes back over 150 years ago, and then before that the certain rabbis allowed farmers to sell their land to a non-Jew for a period of a couple of years, and then they would be able to harvest as normal as if the Shemitah didn't exist. It's kind of similar to selling your chametz, but not exactly. There was a big political and halachic discussion for over 100 years regarding heter mechira. The OU, as many other certifications, does not certify heter mechira. That's a very common factor for fruits and vegetables in Israel. The second part is what we call yevul nochri, which is the harvest of those who are non-Jewish. As I'm sure you're all aware, there are non-Jews both in the southern part of Israel, both in the north, both in the middle, who are not Jewish, and Shemitah only affects Jewish-owned land. So when the fruits and vegetables, wine, olives, fruits are harvested from non-Jewish land, so that doesn't become a problem. So a large part of the Jewish market, or the Jewish religious market, is basically provided by the non-Jewish farmers around the country, and some even outside the country: Turkey, Holland, Denmark, France, Spain, Italy. That's Yevul Nochri. Number 3, which is a very unique thing, is called Otsar Beit Din, which means the harvest of Beit Din. The Beit Din is the Jewish court, and what they do is, it's a function written over 2,000 years ago. This special mechanism allows for the Beit Din, the rabbis, to collect all the fruits in one area and distribute it to those in need. That also affects wine. That's different than heter mechira, because it's not by a Jew and not by a non-Jew. It's completely Jewish. It's a special way for them to collect all the fruit and vegetables and basically distribute for minimum costs. The 4th way is what I call the future of Shemitah. Basically the underclause is that there are different forms of growing in Israel where Shemitah does not apply. There are certain southern parts of Israel. There's a dispute whether it's 40 kilometers, or how we say 25 miles north of Eilat, or it's 70 miles north of Eilat. Some of those areas do not have the same biblical requirement that you can grow their vegetables. They're growing in greenhouses. There's growing in hydroponics. There's growing in certain areas. And that's kind of a better way to circumvent or really revive Shemitah. I mean, now I'm sure you're aware, it's very new technologies to grow on the wall. You can grow vegetables and fruits and strawberries vertically, which also has Shemitah does not apply to it according to many halakha authorities. So again, we have the 4. We have heter mechira, we have yevul nochri, we have otsar beit din, and we have the unique ways of growing in Shemitah where there's no Shemitah. And that's basically the 4 options the consumer has to purchase his fruit and vegetables.
Hello, I hope you're enjoying this episode so far. I want to break in and give you a sneak peek into next week's episode featuring Dr. Orit Malka.
But the Mishnah refers to the Chavurat Mitzvah as to the meal itself, right? So you see that in the same use, in the same context, it means it carries both meanings. And this happens also in the Greek Symposium and in the Latin Convivium. They all have that double meaning because they refer to the same social institution.
I hope you enjoy that sneak peek into next week's episode. Now back into this episode.
For the listener's sake, that we do have some very specific of the 20 times that Kerem appears in the Chumash, in the 5 books of Moses. A couple of them are specific to Shemitah. Exodus 23 verses 10 and 11, and Leviticus 25 verses 1 through 7 call out very specifically Kramim, vineyards. So this is not just there is a general agricultural aspect to Shemitah, but there's also a very specific for the Jewish drinkers amongst us, vineyard specific as well. So Rabbi Friedman, when it comes to practices, how of the 4 options you just mentioned, how many of them apply contemporarily to vineyards?
Very good question. I wanted just to add briefly that wine is one of the important aspects mentioned in Shemitah. because that's what the example the Torah gives to Shemitah. So there's a good point you mentioned, the amount of times mentioning Kerem has a lot of meaning about vineyards. So regarding the 4 options, normally 2 or 3 of them apply. Southern Israel's
not
desert
a growing region.
is not a growing region. You have nice vineyards. Non-Jews don't grow as much wine, but there is something that we do bring in wine. I'm going to try to separate between what we call cheaper wines and grape juice and your fancier wines. So it is common that certain large industrial wineries, I'm sure on your show you've differentiated between an industrial winery and a boutique winery. You can't compare the types of grow that's done. So certain industrial wineries take from Yevul Nochri or Hetem Mechira. They either choose ones, and sometimes they'll take from Chutzlaretz, they'll take from out of Israel. And the grapes that are low level, they'll make grape juice, and the other nicer grapes they'll take from different countries, they'll try to make different types of wines. Boutique wineries are much more complicated because they're focused on local vineyards that the owners of the vineyard and the owners of the winery are very connected. It's very hard for them to leave their own product and go find foreign grapes. So they either do Otsar Beit Din. We have a winery in Israel that does Otsar Beit Din, which is tremendous. You can come to the vineyard whenever you want. This is the time of year. Maybe Rabbi Jew flying some of your listeners to go and make their own Otsar Beit Din wine. It's truly a lovely experience in the area of Judea and Samaria, the area of the southern Israel, of the northern Negev. We're talking about Kiryat Gat, where there are places where they go and they collect yourselves. You can collect the grapes. They teach you the process of the mushing, the crushing, the fermentation, and you can make your own wine. And there's some who do Otsar Beit Din, which basically they sign a contract with different Kashrut certifications to come in and produce their wine in a very halachic fashion, not just halachic in terms of Kashrut, but halachic in terms of Shemittah. And that wine is provided to the larger public as well.
Wait, the Otsar Beit Din, people, how does it acquired? How does the Beit Din acquire it? Or
right.
People
so
deliver it to the Beit Din?
So there are 2 forms of Otsar Beit Din that are done. I won't get into too much of the complicated halachic jargon, but what happens is there is a Beit Din where they provide workers that do it for free. They come in and they work and they receive minimal payment to come in and crush the grapes. Certain additives aren't added. Maybe tartaric acid might not be added. Certain ways of aging is allowed, but there's sometimes minimal stuff done. They come produce the wine at the vineyard. The owner of the vineyard and winery gave over basically the wine in theory belongs to the Beit Din. And there are 2 options. Either they're given out at areas where those can pick it up for almost free, or they're sold in certain stores for minimum cost. I should mention, Rabbi Jew, saying I did not mention, I think it's important to realize, is that wine or grape juice made in Otsar Beit Din has a unique holiness called Kedushat Shvit, the holiness of Shemitah. That when a wine is picked, that it's not from non-Jews, and Shemitah applies, it has a special holiness. It can be drinking only in Israel. It can be drinking in a certain fashion. It can't be wasted. It can't be made into certain things. So it makes the wine, it takes your lovely boutique Shemitah wine to a whole other level.
So it cannot be brought outside of the land of Israel.
That is correct.
Okay. So, but even for diasporian Jews, if they were to visit Israel in the next several years and they come across an Otsar Beit Din wine, so you said you can't waste it. Is that one of the stipulations?
One of the issues is, for example, if you drink a cup of regular wine, I'm sure it would never happen to any of your listeners, the type of wine you drink. But there's a little bit left on that little cup, a little area where it seeps in on the bottom of the cup there. So in a regular year, you might wash it out. On Otsar Beit Din, you have to add water and drink it. Every single drop is holy. Can't let it fall out. If you were to see Otsar Beit Din in Israel, there are halachic authorities who would allow you to take minimal amounts and bring it to America and then drink Kedushat Shvit there. But I would ask a common halachic authority about how to go about this correctly.
Interesting. So people do that?
Yes, there are people who do buy Otsar Beit Din wine or receive Otsar Beit Din wine as a gift, and they take minimal 2, 3, 4, 5, however bottles you drink, and they do bring it to the States or overseas to drink.
Wow,
it's rare. It's a rarity. We try our best not to do it because we don't want a type of distribution system where we end up sending 15, 16 cases and not 2 or 3 bottles. But there's no really way to control it, because when you go to a wine shop or a winery and you're a tourist, the person doesn't see USA on your forehead. You pay and buy a bottle of wine. What you do afterwards is your own business.
And are there different practices that people are supposed to do outside of the land of Israel with Otsar Beit Din wine?
So the Otzar Beit Din wine, there is the practices are similar to Israel. There's a time where you have to make sure you drink it. There's certain people there's certain limitations. There's a time where you have to do what's called biur. You have to relieve your ownership of, even in Chutzlaretz, even in America, the diasporan Jews relieve your ownership of the wine at a certain date and then come back and take it again. But it's definitely, I think, a special opportunity. Those who do it on a halachic permit to drink both in Israel and outside Israel holy Shemitah wine. I truly believe that the flavor infused and the holiness infused wine is better. In fact, I know of a winery last Shemitah, or 2 Shemitahs ago. Yes, last Shemitah, who actually his Shemitah wine got a prize, or I think his non-Shemitah wine that he didn't touch, he got a special prize, and he made a lot of awards for it. So he felt that in the merit of him keeping Shemitah, he had better wine.
Huh. Wow, that's really cool. I don't know if we got too granular too quickly. This is all really great. I do want to point out, I'm going to take a step back. I do want to point out we had on episode 92, we had Adam Montefiore, the wine writer for Jerusalem Post. So I didn't realize this is only the 19th Shemitah cycle that this has really come up, because prior to that, like 19 Shemitah cycles ago, there were no Jewish vineyards. They were like in the middle of the 19th century for kosher wine production. Everything was purchased from the Arab farmers or the vineyard keepers. And then before that, there really hadn't been wine made in Israel since the 6th century, since prior to the Muslim conquest. So really this is all essentially this is only the 19th Shemitah cycle.
Very correct. You're absolutely right.
Hey there, I wanted to see how you're enjoying the episode so far. If you have any feedback, comments, questions, anything, please let me know. And also, if you have topics as well as potential guests, including, who knows, maybe yourself, please let me know. Feel free to reach out to me at drew@jewishdrinking.com. Thank you, and now back into the show.
So going back to something you mentioned earlier about the debates around how heter mechira and sort of the debates, can you share a little bit about that?
So I mean, it goes back to an old halachic argument. If basically there are two aspects. One is let's say there's a conceptual halachic level, and then there's a practical legal level. The conceptual halachic level is does the halachic selling of the land to a non-Jew owned by a Jew in a place where Jews sit, does that rectify all the laws of Shemitah? And it basically relieves all laws of Shemitah. There are opinions of halacha that know that if land was owned by a non-Jew prior, and it was an area that wasn't exactly Eretz Yisrael in terms of the biblical boundaries, that would work. But selling a piece of land near Yerushalayim, where the Jews have conquered, and giving over the land, even though there might be binding legal legality to the selling, might not halachically affect it, because there's an opinion that once it's owned by a Jew, passing over to a non-Jew will have no halach effect. So just technically, you won't gain anything. It's as if the land still belongs to a Jew, and you can't work it, and you get a harvest normally. So that's one aspect. That's the conceptual halachic argument. The latter is something completely different. It's even if there's halachic legitimacy to the selling of the land that will dynamically or drastically change the halachic obligation of the farmland, the question that needs to be addressed is that really a legal sale? Is it binding? Is it something that really holds water? When I give over the land to a non-Jew and he doesn't plan on buying it, and I can harvest it and do whatever I want, I could theoretically sell it. Is that a halachically binding sale? Is it similar to selling our chametz? I'm sure all of us know that many people sell, our leavened bread or source of leavened bread in order to prevent chametz. Yes.
Fun fact: the whole permissibility of chametz selling started with whiskey.
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's correct. Very good. Yeah, in the 14th, 15th century.
Yeah.
Right. That's how it started. Correct. So it's very similar. Jews, I'm sure, as your podcast, your listeners know, Jews happen to like alcohol and are very good at selling it, drinking it, and producing it.
It's part of Jewish life.
L'chaim.
L'chaim, indeed.
So we're going back to the legality. So some say is selling the land similar to selling chametz. I want to make a small point that as opposed to chametz, you could point out that when we sell our chametz on Pesach, those who sell it in the appropriate halachic fashion and are very careful, they kind of distance themselves from the chametz all 8 days. They put it in a room, they give it over, they don't deal with it. They don't handle it at all. You can't touch it. as opposed to the Shemitah sale, where we're really just, having our daily routine. We're still watering, we're still gathering. So maybe that could affect why those who feel that selling chametz on Pesach is legitimate might not be as might not advocate for the sale of the of Heter Mechira.
Because you're still using it versus the chametz and Pesach. Okay.
There are certain vineyards who do Heter Mechira. They will sell to America. The unfortunate reality is that almost all Kashrut certifications in the United States, both local vadim and international national hashgachas, will not approve of Heter Mechira. So it won't be sold in many places. It actually is an unfortunate reality for the wine drinker of America. What the distributors try to do is they supplement. They try to make very large productions the year before Shemitah and very large productions the year after Shemitah to provide the vintage that the American Jewish consumer, American consumer in general, wants to drink.
Okay, so here's a question. I know you said that the Kashrut organizations are not a fan of Heter Mechira, but if it happens to somehow get to Americans and we realize we're drinking a bottle of a Heter Mechira wine from Israel. Well, first of all, are there any any kosher supervisors certifications that do stamp their sort of seal of approval on these?
In Israel, there are certifications. Their local certifications do it. The chief rabbinate still supports Heter Mechira on a national level for different needs. Again, that's a different idealistic, historical, and halachic discussion. But when it arrives, when it becomes North American, so it's pretty much across the board that North American certifications will not approve Heter Mechira. So what will happen is you might have an Israeli stamp of approval, but again, I think you could ask your local rabbinical authority how to deal with it, because there are local very, very prestigious rabbis who allow Heter Mechira, but once it enters the American arena, it won't be sold at restaurants it won't be used at restaurants that are kosher, probably.
Oh, wow. So my question really was leading up to, as far as on the consumer end, if we happen to have it, I'm not saying we should or shouldn't, but if one happens to have it, the oats are baked. Whereas with the oats are baked in, we have to make sure it's good down to the last drop, right? We can't waste any of it. Is that a similar thing with the Heter Mechira wine? That's
a very good question. A very good question, Rabbi Jew. There is a big dispute about that. Most halakha authorities do hold that once it becomes Heter Mechira, it's as if it's drinking like any other year, whether it be the 6th, the 8th, the 1st, the 3rd, the 5th. And basically it's like regular wine. There are some authorities that hold that even Heter Mechira, you should keep the Kedushat Shvi'it aspect of not wasting it and not giving it to certain people. There are different customs.
Okay, that sounds good. So going back to the Kedusha Shvi'it, especially insofar as it relates to, let's say it's an oats are baked in wine. We don't have the Heter Mechira question, right? So it's an oats are baked in wine, and we have this. So where does this notion of the Kedusha Shvi'is come from? This sort of the holiness of the seventh, for those less familiar with Hebrew, the holiness of the seventh year wine. So where does that come from? That it has this special level that we're not supposed to allow even a drop to go to waste.
So it's a very, very good point. I'm gonna give a little bit of the halachic background, and I'm gonna add maybe a bit of my own to try to I hope I have the permission of Rabbi Jew to kind of give something to of my own out to this. So the two aspects of fruit in general, and specifically wine on Shemitah, is that it's the ownership is forfeited. So the ownership, basically anybody can come and pick wine or make wine, pick grapes, pick lemons and apples and oranges and potatoes and tomatoes and cucumbers from anybody's garden. But not only can you pick them, you have to treat them with a certain type of holiness. There are over 16 different laws relating to the holiness of Shemitah fruit that apply to either not sending them to overseas, eating them in an appropriate fashion, not feeding them to certain, not eating them not using them in an odd fashion, making sure that it's all kinds of other laws that you don't destroy it, that you don't waste it, all kinds of other laws. That are unique to the holiness of Shemitah fruit. The reason behind it is quite simple, because our Torah says that the land of Israel belongs to Hashem. The reason why we have Shemitah, like we have Shabbat, is to teach us that the land belongs to Hashem, just like everything we own belongs to Hashem. He brings us everything we need. So it would seem, in my opinion, that the treatment of the fruit that is so meticulous, more than any type of food, matzah on Pesach, food in the sukkah, is to teach us and make an emphasis that the fruit and vegetables we eat, even though there's no owner, at the end there is one owner, our Father up in heaven.
And wine too.
Our wine too.
Not
the
just
wine
food.
is 100%.
Not just food.
You're drinking God's wine, God's
There we go.
vintage 2022 wine.
By the way, did you know that's where the name of Carmel came from? It's Karam Ale,
Oh wow.
God's vineyard.
That's that. Now it was worth that I came on your show, Rabbi Jew. If I came to your show to hear that idea, I am thrilled. I did not know that.
Yeah,
And
they're not.
ironic
It's not a reference to like food caramel. It's Karam Ale together.
very nice. Wow.
I learned that from
Unbelievable.
Anna Montefiore. So
Amazing.
Hey there, I hope you're enjoying this episode so far. I want to break in again, and if you have ideas beyond the show, beyond the podcast, beyond this video content, if you have ideas for what Jewish drinking can bring you, whether it's, who knows, maybe it's Zoom sessions, maybe it's events, maybe, who knows, swag, please let me know. I'm very curious to hear from you any ideas, things that we can do, things that I can bring you from Jewish drinking. So feel free to reach out to me at drew@jewishdrinking.com. I'm happy to bring that to you. All right, now back into the show.
anything I didn't ask about?
Well, there is the processing of the wine, which again is a little bit unique. So the filtering, sometimes you don't filter certain wines that are, some wines aren't pasteurized.
Is this for the Otzer Beitin or the other? What was the other one?
The
Where
Otzer
you just bring?
Heter Mechira.
What was the other one where you bring your own stuff? Is that the Yvol Nachri or?
No, that's the Otzer Beitin. Otzer Beitin, you come and do whatever you want.
Oh, okay.
I know that's Hefke. I mean, if you let it be somebody, there are people who let it run rampant. You go and make your own wine. That's really the primary Shemitah, like original Shemitah. Otzer Beitin, they have certain limitations as well.
Uh-huh.
And it's made into delicious wines and used Baruch Hashem all over Israel. The process is unique, and it's really an opportunity for those who want to deal with winemaking hands-on to come to Israel and find. I mean, and this is not now. Rabbi Jew, your listeners understand that they're not in any rush to get on a plane and fly to Israel. The harvest is only happening now. This wine creating can be done. You can go and buy Otzer Beitin wine in next year. 6-8 months, 5, 10, 15 years from now.
Wow.
And to be able to be a part of the process is truly very special, and get to know winemaking hands-on.
Wow, that's really wonderful. Did you mention something about production? Is there anything different production-wise?
So again, sometimes they don't filter the wines. Some wines are unpasteurized or cooked that might be pasteurized and cooked. Normally, what you'll find with at least the virgin stuff and all the other types of grapes is that there's certain treatments done to regular year grapes that they're much more organic. I mean, if we have the term, I'm sure you discuss organic and non-organic wines. So Otzer Beitin is almost exclusively organic because all kinds of different, processes and stuff might be involved would not be done to Otzer Beitin for halachic reasons, not for organic reasons. So it's very common to find organic Shemitah wine.
Wow.
And that's pretty much part of the process. It's again, I think that when somebody feels the holiness of the wine, they'll enjoy it as well.
That is really wonderful. Rabbi Friedman, this has been really great. Before we go, is there anything that you would like to promote? I
want to promote others to try to, just as you have, Baruch Hashem, thank God, made this amazing podcast for those to enjoy and talk about wine and kosher wine and feel connected to what we eat, not just eat it for no reason. I think it's an opportunity for me in the kosher industry to tell those to take an interest and learn more and be educated on how the food process works, how wine is made, and whiskey and brandy and so on and so forth. And we get connected to our sources, just like we do everything else in life.
That's wonderful. I mean, what about your halacha hotline? What's that about?
Our halacha hotline, we have, thank God, 6,000 questions a year in all areas of kashrut, especially Israeli-related tourists, wine, chocolate, dairy production, meat production. And it's 24/6. Thank God we have Shabbat. Just like we have Shemitah, we have Shabbat, turn our phones off. But it's a very, very interactive and dynamic hotline where we give the advice and help those in halachic need through the process of visiting Israel or eating products around the world. And basically, at the end of the day, it's being transparent. We want to provide transparency for our consumers to have the information, let them decide the halachic standards. We, of course, abide by our OU standards, but providing the public with the knowledge they need. Education is the greatest weapon. And if they can understand and really delve in what the halachic levels are, they'll feel more connected to eating kosher and consuming kosher. And thank God, I'm sure you're aware, the kosher market is growing at a rapid rate. We're $150 billion a year business, and it's only growing. Companies are reaching out to us daily, whether it be from the Far East, from Southern Russia, from Southeast Asia, from South America, from Australia and the United States, to bring more kosher food.
Amazing. I mean, all right, Rabbi Friedman, this has been fantastic. This has been informative. Thank you so much. And l'chaim.
Chaim.
L'chaim.